yeah, starting to look like a car. I think I am going to just move over all of my old electronics to the new car, and then I'll get an exact one-to-one comparison of what the new car's like versus the old one. So the chassis is mostly complete. Now it's time to start building some shocks, and that's where front shocks is in bag K, and I just want to briefly mention some of the upgrades in the 0.2 over the original. First thing is this spacer here, which is going in between the two silicone rings. That did not exist on the EB410, and it's something that aftermarket you could add. There was an MIP spacer kit, shock cartridge kit that would add that. In the original 410, they just had these on top of each other, and they would turn into like a pump, and they would suck air into your shock. A little spacer in between stops that from happening. Other changes in the 0.2 shocks. The pistons are now a much nicer material. It's definitely like a machined... Whoa, it's slippery. Where'd it go? Yeah, slipped right out of my hand. That's a good sign. These are noticeably slicker pistons. White, it's kind of Delrin. This looks like it's a mix, where it's this gray color, but it's very slick. I think that's going to be a noticeably smoother shock just by the change in the piston type. Also the shock caps. I am going to build it with the plastic shock caps just because the metal ones that I have on my original 410 are all scraped up and they look bad. So at least these look new. But the original 410 had really soft shock caps. These ones are much stronger, so they should be easier to thread on. Also, the breather hole looks to be much refined as well. The emulsion hole, that was kind of clogged on the original. Overall theme of this 0.2 is just the machining and the build materials are much better. One of the changes to the shocks is how they ride on the shock standoffs. This part is a shock bushing which goes in through the cap, and what that does, that rides on this new fixed position bushing that's on the shock standoff, so it kind of clicks on, and what that does is it gives you the exact right amount of play while being able to fully tighten down your nut. So that's what this little piece does. The annoying thing about this is that Tekno sells these parts separately. Like, let's say this breaks. If you break this, then you not only have to buy this part, but this part does not come with this part. So then you have to buy that separately, and they want $10 just for that, from what I saw, $10 Canadian. It's a little pricey. The shocks are reds on front, and I always recommend when you're building it through shocks to put the color code on the top. They just tends to last longer. One of the things about tuning springs is if you ever lose the color, it's nearly impossible to figure out what they were. I'm going to look up my build sheet and see if I wanted to go that weight or not. Both front and rear are 600. Shock build is going very well. One thing is you're going to want a pair of shock build pliers. This is a great tool. It allows you to hold on to a shock shaft without damaging it while you're doing a one of the most annoying steps about building shocks, which is threading on the ball end. So it just allows you to hold on in a non-damaging way. This way you don't have to use a rag and a plier. It just makes life so much easier. Also, when you're screwing this on, they say to make the shock 23 millimeters when it's at its full extension. Just be aware that this is not proper scale. That's 23 millimeters. I had room in the book to actually draw it at full scale. I don't know why they didn't. Or at least give us a 23 millimeter guide just to help people out, because yeah, either you need calipers or a measuring tape, but yeah, that's 23 millimeters, not as shown. I'm basically just at the filling stage. I am going to use the 600 CST oil in the front. I am going to run a lighter grade oil in the rear over book specs just because we run in colder climates, and then I'll tune springs after we get it on the track. Also, the pistons are reversible and you want it with the numbers facing up. So these are the 1.2 millimeter holes, and the rears will get the 1.3 millimeter holes with the numbers facing up. And yeah, this is a very nice and smooth shock. The shocks are built, and now I'm just about to put in this new 2.0 part, 0.2 part I should say, which is this little bushing. And so this bushing goes into the plastic cap or metal cap if you upgrade. And this is a little bit of a weird part in that that is your shock cap bushing, and then that just clicks on over top of this to give you the perfect amount of play. And so the whole point of those shock bushings is so that you can tighten your nuts down as hard as you can, and you're bottoming out on the metal part of the shock standoff, but then the bushing allows you to have that play in the shock cap, so you're not clamping it to the shock cap to the tower. That's the whole point. You have to be aware of which direction you put it in. That faces down, it clips in this way. You don't want to put it in that way, as well as depending on what way you put it is what way the bleeder screw is on your caps. So that's your choice if you want to have them outside for easier maintenance or inside to keep them clean. I chose to keep them inside because that's how they show it in the book. Back ones just have to be mounted, but they're already built, ready to put the springs on and mount up. Okay, all the shocks are on and we're on the final assembly. So I put 450 CST weight oil in the rear, which is a lot lighter than they say in the book. So it has bigger pistons in the rear, bigger piston holes than the front by 0.1 millimeter, as well as I believe the rear springs are softer. But I put in a lighter weight oil, 450 CST rear, 600 CST front. It might be too light in the rear. I might have to go up to 500, but I didn't have 500. I only had 450. So we'll do that. We'll see how it handles on the track. Well, we're at the final stages now. Between the last little final assembly, which is putting in the servo, installing the motor and the electronics and the wing and the body, we are done. I am choosing to put in the high mount servo. You do get these extra parts, the low mount servo, the rear flex brace where you can run the short, you do get that. Here's all the extra parts and a couple of the final screws to finish this up. That was my EB410.2, the differences between the 0.2 to the original. And I'm going to finish this up. I think I am going to just move over all of my old electronics to the new car, and then I'll get an exact one-to-one comparison of what the new car's like versus the old one. Electronics are in. I'm on one of the final steps on the EB410.2, and it's this rear wing mount. Now you're supposed to run this riser. This is a 5mm riser. They also give you a 10mm riser. If you choose to run the 10mm, they don't give you the 20mm screws that you need to actually run it on that extra 5mm high. So it's a different screw length on the rear of the 0.2. It's a 14mm screw instead of like an 8, and you're putting it through this block, which I don't necessarily like. Also, because the 0.2 has its shocks on the front now, when you're building the wing, you don't cut out the rear shock location. But getting that lined up through all the pieces, it's kind of fiddly, but I'm sure it will perform well. As well as I'm choosing to install it on the very rear location, which moves it the most forward, which tucks it in right at the edge of the rear shock tower. Alright guys, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you're new on here, subscribe. If you want to talk to me, leave a comment down below. And as always, thanks for watching. Look forward to seeing the EB410.2 final reveal and it on the track soon.